Right in the corner here,
okay,
from what I can tell. And
the bipartisan corner.
Bipartisan corner, yeah. As you all know, Senator Murphy and I are two members of a working group that is looking at athlete financial circumstances and how those might be adjusted in the future. We were happy today to invite the head of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, to join us and give us preliminary perspectives that he has, and learning about the process that he'll need to undertake for the NCAA to consider some of the changes it might recommend. Obviously, the viewpoint of the NCAA is not the only viewpoint on this topic. It's going to be considered by the working group, but certainly an important one, and we're happy to have had the chance to hear from him today, and representatives from Senator Rubio's office and Senator Booker's office were with us today. They're both doing other things. I think Senator Booker's in Iowa, and Senator Rubio is chairing the Foreign Relations Committee, so he was not sitting with us at the table, but they're here in spirit, and their staff has joined us as well. Let me turn the time over to Senator Murphy and then Dr. Emmert.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Romney. Thanks for convening us. I think this is going to be a really important forum for us to try to make sure that this conversation inside the Senate remains a bipartisan one. I think there's not a lot of theological division over some of the questions about what the future of college athletes' rights should be, and I'm really grateful to have Dr. Emmert here with us. Listen, I've been a critic of the current structure of college athletics. I think it's time for us to recognize that student athletes need to get a little bit more than they are today, need to receive a little bit more protection financially and otherwise. And I'm really grateful that the NCAA is willing to be part of this conversation. I think Senator Romney's right. This is the right first meeting to have. But of course, there are lots of other voices that need to be heard, first and foremost, student athlete voices. And I'm looking forward to, once we get back in the new year, to continuing this discussion and to continuing to work with colleges and universities and athletic department programs to try to find a way forward to recognize what I think a lot of Americans desire, which is to have more of the bounty coming out of college athletics accrue to the benefit of the kids who are showing up every day, working hard and putting on a pretty good show for an increasing fan base all around the country. But Dr. Emmert, very glad to be in discussions with you today.
Dr. Emmert.
Well, my pleasure. I'm obviously extremely pleased that the two senators have decided to take a leadership role in this debate. There's a lot of interest across Congress in college sports. It's obviously a very important part of Americana, and there's 500,000 young men and women who are participating in NCAA sports, and their health, welfare, well-being is very, very important to all of us. And so having the two of you step into this directly is very constructive. The leadership of the NCAA, meaning the Board of Governors, which is a body of university presidents and a handful of other citizens, has already indicated a strong interest and desire to modernize our rules to provide greater opportunity for student athletes in a variety of areas that we're talking about. And we at the same time have, of course, a number of state laws that are being promulgated around the country to address some components of this issue. And having, in the end, 50 different state laws is a challenge to anything that's trying to be operated at a national level around the country. So having this discussion be elevated to the congressional level, I think, is very, very good, and certainly welcome from my point of view.
With that, any questions you might have?
Can you tell us how this relates to the sports betting legislation you're working on with Senator Schumer, specifically regarding college sports and sports betting?
Yeah, I don't know of a relationship between the two at this stage. Senator Schumer and I are working together to say that with regards to sports betting, if states are going to allow that, we'd like to see there to be some standards so that there's not abuse in that area. But I don't believe the sports betting arena is connected to this particular issue. Time may go on when we understand what that association might be, but I think that's a very different set of considerations.
Dr. Emmert?
Dr. Emmert,
Yes.
you've obviously suggested that having Congress is welcome here. How will the NCAA, though, take action against individual states who move ahead with their own law before federal legislation?
Well, what we've been doing is communicating to each of the states what we're trying to do and make sure they understand that the association is not just willing, but is actively moving forward on these topics. And we make all of our decisions. It's not as well understood as it should, but all the decisions in the NCAA are made through a legislative process of representative government representing the 1,100 colleges and universities. And so that's not as speedy a process as people might like. But in fact, it does allow for the schools to have a voice in each of these decisions. They're working on it right now. We're hopeful that by spring there'll be some clear indication of where the universities want to go on this and related topics, and that will give some reassurance to the states that some of their concerns are being addressed. And we'll just continue to move down that path. Should they move forward anyway, well then the member schools are going to have to make some decisions about how they might proceed, but it's too early to really indicate what that might look like.
There's some legislation in the House right now that creates more or less an unrestricted market for student athletes in the future. Is that something you guys see as a viable option, or does there need to be more regulation and oversight for whatever you end up proposing?
Well, I'll speak for myself. Listen, I'm a supporter of the California law, but I also acknowledge that this is a national endeavor, college sports, and it really can't ultimately work with 50 different state laws. And so I would like to see us work with the NCAA and work with student athletes to try to come up with a federal solution that not only addresses the issue of having access to revenue through name, image, and likeness, but also speaks to issues of broader compensation and perhaps a fairer mechanism of compensation than simply making money off of endorsement deals. And so I'm personally very open to a number of different ways to get there, and I'd rather do that in concert with the NCAA than without. And so that's I think our goal. At least that's my goal.
I think it's very hard to have colleges competing across state lines, and each state has different rules about how the athletes are able to participate financially in their sport. And so you'd like to have some kind of standard. I think there's also a question about, will this be used in recruitment? And will coaches or athletic directors be able to go out and work out deals beforehand with various sponsors and offer them in recruiting? And what impact would that have on the ability of various colleges and universities to compete with one another across state lines? I think there are issues of that nature that need to be considered. So I think there probably needs to be some kind of national standard or series of guidelines, although at this stage I don't know what those will look like. And as Senator Murphy's just indicated, one of the areas of my personal interest is to see a way not just for the very top athletes to be able to take advantage of the name, image, and likeness, which is appropriate, but also some of the athletes that are in sports not quite as visible, or perhaps positions in a very visible sport, but a position which is not particularly visible, to allow those, particularly in circumstances of real poverty, how to help those young people be able to make it through their college years, for their families to be able to survive during those college years. And so thinking about those issues are ones that are going beyond just name, image, and likeness. Because if you're the left tackle at a Division I school that may not be the most prominent school in the country, you're probably not going to see a lot that's going to come from name, image, and likeness.
Dr. McDuff, can you clarify the NCAA's position on name, image, and likeness? Are you open to athletes receiving compensation in exchange for the use of their name, image, and likeness?
Yeah, so our Board of Governors, back in October, indicated a clear willingness to explore this issue and try and find some ways to provide greater opportunities. Virtually everybody is in agreement that moving forward on this and related issues makes sense, and this is a really good time to be doing it. At the same time, they also made clear some really important parameters, that college sports always needs to be about students playing other students, not about hired employees playing other hired employees. And that the relationship between a school and their student athletes, between college athletes and a university, should be that of student and school, not of employee-employer. That's their first critical distinction. Secondly, they want to make sure that whatever occurs can be done in a way that doesn't uproot the many good things that occur right now in college athletics. We've been able over the past decade or so in particular to increase in very significant ways the benefits and support that student athletes are already receiving. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. How do you continue to make sure there's great opportunities for women in particular, that the sports that are not as prominent are continued to be supported, the Olympic sports, etc. How do you do it in a way that the economic model for colleges that don't have a lot of resources doesn't cause them to just get out of college sports? We don't want to reduce the opportunity to play sports. And then the last piece I think that everybody agrees with is that this has to be done in a way that doesn't completely blow up the recruitment model, which is at the heart of how colleges compete with each other, so that the recruitment process doesn't simply become a pay-for-play sort of model by schools seeing who can have the biggest endorsement deal to go on the recruitment trail with.
We have time for one more
You're saying great opportunities, but does that include compensation?
We had to let somebody else get a question. Did you have a question?
On the academic side, why did the NCAA pass on the bylaw changes that the Rights Commission and Knight Commission and even the Academic Integrity work group?
I'm sorry, what was the first your question?
I'm sorry, on the academic side of things, the NCAA passed on bylaw changes that the Rights Commission, the Knight Commission, I think your own Academic Integrity, that to prevent schools from avoiding academic fraud by letting them determine what constitutes academic fraud.
Well, one of the most important parameters around running college sports in America is the notion that universities are in charge of a lot of what happens on the universities, and that the other schools that they compete with only get to have a certain amount of input and control over what those campuses do on their campuses. Academic integrity of a university is a really important principle to those schools, to the faculty on those schools. And so when they all sit down to talk about those rules, they want to make sure that it's not an athletic association determining whether or not that English 101 class is an English 101 class, that the faculty, the academic leaders of that school are the ones that decide that's what an English class should look like, not the National Athletic Association. And that's where the schools wound up in that particular issue.
Thank you all very much.
We're not finished, guys. We got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, everybody.
Fun way to go.